It is now 7 o'clock in Rome, and I think we should start this webinar. What an exciting time for us here at the Anglican Center to welcome such an online session as regards the environmental crisis we are facing in the wake of the conference to be held in Glasgow. Friends of the ACR, good evening. As Director of the Anglican Center in Rome, I wish to extend to you all a very warm welcome as we inaugurate the first of a series of webinars for this academic year. May I also express to the eminent members of tonight's for accepting to be part of this most important conversation between faith and science on the need for us to care for our common home. It is true that this present generation, more than the precedent one, is responsibly responding to the environmental crisis we are facing. But the voice of scientists and religious leaders have to be heard as they make a distinctive contribution to the ecological debate and as the environment has become an important agenda item at world summits. The opportunity is thus given to us this evening to assimilate the contributions of scientists and religious leaders as they will urge on all of us to live lives that are consistent with good trusteeship of God's world. May I now invite the principal coordinator of this webinar, Revd Dr James Hawkey, member of the Board of Governors of the Anglican Center in Rome, to introduce the moderator of this session and the speakers. To you, Reverend James.
Thank you, Archbishop, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Archbishop Jan has already welcomed you to this event, and it's a great joy that we have such a distinguished panel to help us in advance of the COP26 meeting in Glasgow to explore the fascinating relationship between faith and science, focusing in different ways on care for our common home, to use Pope Francis' phrase from Laudato Si. We're in exceptional hands in our chair, the Reverend Canon Dr Andrew Davison, who is the Starbridge Lecturer in Theology and Natural Sciences in Cambridge, and someone who comes to this conversation as a former professional scientist, as well as one of our most distinguished theologians. We're also delighted to welcome Dr Severine Deneulin, who is the Director of International Development at the Laudato Si Research Institute in Oxford, Archbishop Julio Murray, the Primate of the Anglican Church in Central America, Professor Veerabhadran Ramanathan, who is the Edward A. Friedman Endowed Presidential Chair in Climate Sustainability at the University of California at San Diego, and Bishop Marc Andrus, who is Bishop of California in the Episcopal Church. Our event will run in the following order. In a moment, I'll hand over to Dr. Davison to set the scene, and he will then invite our speakers to contribute. At 5 to 8 Rome time, 5 to 7 London time, we'll have a 5-minute break from our screens before reconvening for a 15-minute panel discussion. Now, if you have a question, please on this occasion do not use the raise hand function, but rather type the question into the chat box so that Dr. Davison can pose your questions to our speakers in the final quarter of an hour of our session. I should also say that this meeting is being recorded. So that's quite enough from me. And I now hand over to Andrew to begin our session.
I'm sure I speak for all who have assembled online this evening in thanking the Anglican Center in Rome for bringing together this excellent panel of distinguished speakers, and I'm delighted to be chairing things today. The timing is tremendously important. As we know, the COP26 meeting next month in Glasgow is placing the predicament of our planet once more urgently before us. You hardly need me to underline the problem. The facts speak for themselves. Whether that would be more abstractly in statistics, I could give you a list of the world's hottest years, and we would find that they have fallen relentlessly in the last decade or so. But perhaps more to pull upon our hearts and engage our imagination and our sympathy than statistics, we would only need to think about scenes of wildfire and terrible devastation in California, Australia, in Greece, in many other places in the past couple of years. So the timing is important, but so also is the particular context and interest of this evening, which is around theology and religion, especially Christianity. And particularly appropriate that the Anglican Centre should be in Rome, and that we can reflect in part upon the witness of the current Pope. We can hardly forget the pivotal role played by Pope Francis before the COP23 meeting in Paris in 2015. The meeting that, for me, first gave me some hope that the world might rise to the challenge of tackling climate change. And it seemed to me at the time that Pope Francis emerged as truly the world leader par excellence at that moment, not least with his encyclical already mentioned Laudato Si. Historians of the future may well see that as the definitive element, the definitive intervention that made a great difference leading up to the conference. And once again, this year, the Pope and other religious leaders, not least the Ecumenical Patriarch, so much the Green Patriarch, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, will be speaking, urging, exhorting the human family to have care for our common home, as Francis has put it. In thinking about the role of religion in these conversations, I'm drawn to comments made by my colleague at Cambridge, Professor Julian Allwood, Professor of Engineering and the Environment. As one of the UK's leading figures on climate change, he has often said that neither science nor engineering are going to be enough. That's quite a provocative thing for an engineer to say, and someone so deeply grounded in the science. Well, the science obviously underpins our awareness of climate change and our need to respond to it and what those responses might look like. But the science is not going to be enough for the simple reason that it has been perfectly clear for a long time now the way in which things are going. Scientists year on year help us to have a more accurate picture of that, but we all know in which direction the arrow is pointing. So we don't need more science. What we need is for the science to be taken account of and for lives to change on as a result of it. The science is the foundation for all of this, but what we need is changing of hearts and minds, and it's clear that the human race is not responding to the science quickly enough. And similarly, the engineering is tremendously important, and who cannot but marvel at phalanxes of noble wind turbines off the shore of our country, or homes that need very little heating, even in the depths of winter, and so on. But the engineering, again, will not be enough. As that particular professor of engineering puts it in speaking to him, he says that the engineering simply won't come quickly enough to be able to save us. And indeed, he thinks that there is a real danger that we will put our trust in engineering solutions in a way that will seem to absolve us from the need to change our lives. Thinking that there will be some sort of magical engineering fix, that in some way engineering is going to ride over the hill as a knight on a charger and slay the dragon for us, may in fact distract us, allow us to displace our efforts, excuse us for the need of change. So the engineering is clearly tremendously important, and the science underpins it all, but neither by themselves are bringing about the kind of changes in our way of life that we need. And so, as Professor Allwood says, we need more than science, we need more than engineering, we need all that will change hearts, change minds, and lead us to turn around. This is familiar language for us within the church. What we need is repentance. We need every possible ally that we can find that will be able to mediate between huge concepts and the call that is directed to all of us, and on the other hand, how that plays out in the local, in the personal, in the mundane. And here, surely, religion is going to, and has already played an important part in taking what the science tells us and pulling upon our heartstrings. This is truly a moral, a spiritual crisis, and we will need our moral and spiritual traditions in order to bring us to our senses. The charge that religion, and Christianity in particular, lies at the root of our environmental degradation has been made and made again since the 1960s. And there is much that can be said against it. I've written a little about myself. But we need to face up to the fact that our traditions, not least within Christianity, have a mixed legacy here. So it is true that the doctrine of creation has been much eclipsed in recent centuries. We can be thankful that today the doctrine of creation plays a very important role, again, within our theological conversations. And it is true that paradigms of domination have been part of the problem. Christianity is a mixed bag. There are spiritualities that cherish the world. There are spiritualities that see the world as God's gift, the arena for our encounter with God. But there are also spiritualities, we might say, of dissent, of escape. One's the spectre of Gnosticism always lingers close at hand. And we must admit that there are trends within our traditions that would tend to see this world as that which we need to escape from, and matter as really not part of the theological picture. I want to just end with one suggestion about the sort of ways in which our spiritual traditions, and Christianity here in particular, have something really important to offer. I want to suggest, again, drawing on that same professor's work, that important as it is for us to think about flying and heating and the food that we eat and all that sort of thing, there's also a very urgent call for us to think about the way in which we make things and use them and dispose of them and so on. The theme that's sometimes called material demand reduction. So just the stuff that we produce in order to make things is very costly in terms of carbon emissions. And if we carry on just producing more and more stuff and using it for a little while and throwing it away, then we simply won't be able to meet our targets. We need, the estimates are, perhaps to cut our use of material by perhaps 80%. That might seem like an impossible figure, but if we made our things to be twice as efficient, to use half the material, and they were to last twice as long as at present, we'd be pretty much there. So it's not beyond our capacities, but we need to think urgently about how it is that we produce and look after and reuse and recycle and repair objects. And here I'm struck that our traditions have a great deal to teach us. I remember a conversation with Joan Chichester, the Benedictine nun, in which she talked to me about the way in which her Benedictine tradition had a certain kind of piety towards the tools that had been inherited from previous generations. You didn't throw things away, not just because it would be a cost, but because these were the things that your sisters in the order had used in the past, and you repaired them, you cherished them, and you passed them on. There's something there about a tradition of care and reverence that we could learn a lot from. Also, of course, the way in which our religious traditions, and especially the religious life, teaches us about simplicity, about not simply accumulating things. So we talk a lot about flights, about food, about heating, travel, these sorts of things, and they're all very important. But if I want to make one suggestion myself this evening, it's that the Christian tradition that we come from has a lot to tell us about the way in which we don't simply have lives of accumulation. And as we look towards a future where we're going to have to be much more careful with the things that we have, reusing them and so on, repairing them, I think that our Christian traditions would have a lot to teach us. And we do, after all, follow in the footsteps of a carpenter. And I'm sure that the Lord Jesus, if we had met him face to face, would have had a lot of experience in this sense of repair and reuse, and a certain kind of reverence towards the objects that we have received from the past and that we pass on to the future. So the message then for me is that these religious traditions and all of our moral traditions and spiritual traditions are absolutely not outliers when it comes to the need to respond to climate change, because the call is an urgent one and a drastic one. We need to change the way in which we live. We need to turn round. We need not really more facts, because the facts are perfectly clear. We need them to impinge upon our lives and change the way in which we live. And I don't claim that religion has a monopoly on that front, but I do claim that today, as in the past, for the majority of the world's population, it is through religious traditions but this mediation between the ultimate and the mundane, and the call upon our lives to change is most profoundly heard and responded to. So I'll call it a day there, and I think we move now on to hear from Archbishop Murray.
Thank you very much. And I use this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Anglican Center in Rome, to its director, to the Board of Governors, who have taken on the big responsibility at the proper time with a topic that is very relevant to us, to care for our common home in preparation for the COP26 summit in Glasgow. What are some of the issues rooted in my experience in Central America and the Caribbean is what I'm going to share along with you today. During the coronavirus crisis, there is much talk about solidarity and caring for the most vulnerable, the elderly, women, and children. What the pandemic has done is to raise awareness of all the inequalities that we live in Central America and Panama and around the world as well. Exclusion, the lack of opportunities are made more visible, and it further widened the gap between the rich and the poor. The pandemic has made children invisible, along with the lack of work, the lack of health resources, and we are yet to see the full scope of the impact of the economy and social level. Today, for instance, 65% of people in Panama have been taking the vaccine, but I can't say the same for the other countries in Central America. There's an urgency to respond to the pandemic, and that urgency has shifted the interest in responding to the issues of climate change as well as other demanding issues. We know what Central American society was like before the pandemic, and we do not want to return to that reality. As religious leaders, we have decided to be the agents of reimagining our world and recreating hope in the people and in the communities as well. But most important, the fact that we use our prophetic voice, and that prophetic voice must be well informed, is a must. We also need to pay attention to the local and the global realities that also challenge us. The climate crisis in Central America is not only about fossil fuel and greenhouse gases, but also it's a crisis that has to do with food security and agriculture, forest and deforestation, open air mining and water contaminations, oceans, fish, rising sea levels, rising extinction rates, endangered biodiversity, human population growth, and environmental refugees. These are what we understand as loss and damage topics as described in the Paris Agreement. The developed rich countries bear a huge responsibility for causing the climate crisis we now face. The developing countries are bearing the brunt of climate change, with contributing the least, making loss and damage a matter of justice. We need to take stronger efforts on mitigation and mobilize committed adaptation funds timely where needed, and at the same time put additional resources for loss and damage where we can no longer adapt it. Climate change impacts everyone, but the poorest, the most vulnerable, as I just said, are the most impacted. Here are some examples. Central America and the Caribbean countries are climate vulnerable regions. Countries are experiencing hurricanes, floods, droughts, and at the risk of sea level rise. From our experience, the poorer communities are hit harder with fewer assets to withstand the events and adapt to it. Particularly, women and girls the impact on them is intensified by climate crisis. Their social, economic, and cultural roles and responsibilities play an important role in this regard. They are among the new environmental refugees, and they are the higher numbers. In the month of July of the year 2021, I visited El Salvador and accompanied the church as it signed on to a new Trifinio agreement. This agreement was signed on along with leaders from Honduras and Guatemala, what we better know as the in the north. The agreement is to ensure that governments in the North Triangle region will provide housing and sustainable agriculture projects to respond to the forced migration in that region. I can also share with you the experience of what happened in November of the year 2020, where more than 200 people were killed by Hurricane Eta and Iota. Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Belize were the worst affected. Around 6.8 million people lost their homes and livelihoods to Eta and Iota. More than 500,000 people were displaced. Food production is severely impacted by climate change in Central America. According to the World Food Program, the production of corn and beans is disrupted by years of drought and unpredictable weather. Hunger in the communities of Central American countries has increased almost fourfold from the year 2018 to the year 2021. What is the church doing in Central America to respond to climate change? As a Christian church, we express the power of the Holy Spirit at this unprecedented time. And we also have been sharing about the promises of God being present with us. But this involves more than advocacy and activism. It involves a deeper level of pastoral guidance, innovative vision of the financial and environmental stewardship, and the spiritual and ecological vision as we organize ourselves to serve even better. It calls for us to identify what are the commitments that governments are signing on to, such as the signing of the Paris Agreement in COP21, and to follow up on the same with civil society in our countries. That is a call on religious leaders. Through the Anglican Environmental Network, we are participating for the very first time as an accredited observer to the COP26 in Glasgow. And the appeal that was signed by faith leaders and scientists, which needs to be made known to more and more people, we recognize that the faith leaders and scientists together are a very powerful combination. Knowledge and passion, knowledge and credibility are offered to the leaders of the nations as they commit to greater ambitions at COP26. A portion from the appeal states the following: humanity has the power to think and the freedom to choose. We must address these challenges using the knowledge of science and the wisdom of religion to know more and to care more. We should seek remedies within ourselves, within our communities, and with nature, adopting a holistic approach. We have to think long term for the sake of the whole of humanity. We need to expel the seeds of conflict, greed, indifference, ignorance, fear, injustice, insecurity, and violence. We must focus particularly on those on the margins. We need to act in unison to inspire and energize each other. Now is the time to take transformative action as a common response. But before we can talk about the transformative action, these are my comments, it is important for us to engage in actions, to engage in those actions that will bring about change that will after become transformative actions. We also need to identify, as it says in the document, in the appeal, a new kind of economy, one that is human-centered and inclusive, one that values the resources provided by nature for our well-being, one that cares for the environment and does not exploit it, not based on endless growth and desires, but on supporting life, one that promotes the virtue of sufficiency and condemn the wickedness of excess. It is part of our responsibility then, as religious leaders, as the church in the region, to create awareness in congregations, in schools owned by churches and other religious institutions about the need to respond to climate change in implementing recycling procedures as an initiative for young people as well. Our task is to join with ecumenical and interfaith communities to dialogue with governments about the procedures used in minimizing the use of chemicals in poisoning the water reservoirs, to create a sense of resilience and a call to justice for the people who are marginalized or excluded in society because of climate change. The world is looking for faith in God and confidence in the institutions to carry us through this crisis, and accountability about the resources we have and what we need. The younger generation has voiced their claim to the governments, saying to them, it is time to act. But the younger generation has also looked at the religious leaders and has said to us, we can do more. Yes, it is time to act. With all information we have, it is time to act upon it. We already know how to do much of what is needed to be done. What we need now is the will to do so. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And so now we move on to hear from Professor Ramanathan.
Thank you very much. I am truly honored and delighted to be part of this group. Climate change, as we scientists now recognize, has morphed into climate disruption. Why? We already heard here, last 10 to 15 years, we have seen intense heat waves, droughts, fires, floods, hurricanes, etc., etc. But the actions being taken and even being contemplated now as we are going towards the COP meeting is just not enough. It's not commensurate with the sort of catastrophes that's going to strike us. So many of us has come to the conclusion we need a different approach. So I want to just walk you through one of them. The seeds for this different approach was sown in a meeting at the Vatican about 4 years ago. With the blessing of Pope Francis, we brought together a large group of health experts, climate scientists, several Nobel laureates, and signed this declaration. It was also signed by the late Professor Stephen Hawking of Cambridge. We focused on the health of the people and found that that's going to be where some of the worst effects of climate change are going to be felt. And we concluded that climate change, if unchecked, will pose existential threat to the entire civilization. Let me just a little bit expand on that. So climate problem is really a human health problem. And the new approach is we need to pivot to health to get the sort of massive public support we need. Let me give you the scientific justification for this new approach. Fossil fuels are the biggest source of climate change, but fossil fuels also lead to air pollution, which kills somewhere between 3.6 to 10 million deaths per year. The 10 million death is the most recent estimate by a Harvard study. And then the climate and weather extremes from fossil fuels for the last 20 years has led to more than 606,000 deaths. This is a UN estimate. And believe it or not, 4.1 billion people have been displaced during those 20 years. And it's without any doubt, fossil fuels are the major source for both air pollution and climate disruption. If you go back the last 50 years, when nations have taken major environmental regulations, this is related to the DDT, clean air regulations, and the Montreal Protocol, which phased out CFCs, which was destroying the ozone, they were all due to health effects. And there is a convincing and compelling evidence that we need to focus on the climate effects, the health effects of climate change for the reasons I put. I'm just giving you one or two reasons. The thing which issue with very few are aware of, that even if you take drastic actions, it's going to get a lot worse, a lot sooner than most people think. This is a study we published in the journal Nature 3 years ago, that we are going to cross the 1.5 degree warming threshold by 2030. That's just about 9 years from now. And initially, we were the only ones who made this, and the recent IPCC report also concludes it's going to happen in the early 2030s. So what does that mean? As of 2015, we have witnessed a degree warming, the entire planet. So going from 1 degree to 1.5 is a 50% amplification of the warming, and heaven forbid all the extremes. I'm personally suggesting that, like COVID, climate change will move into our living rooms when that happens. And hopefully there will be a massive public demand for protecting our health. And I hope the society is ready for it. So what is it, some of the things we can expect in the next 10, 20 years as the planet transitions from 1 to 1.5? And if we delay actions, it will go to 2 degrees by 2040s. 1.5 billion additional people will be exposed to deadly heat. More than 500 million will be exposed to vector-borne diseases like Lyme, dengue, malaria, Zika, etc., etc. What is most worrisome, which we are not paying enough attention, There are predictions that 100 million or more would become climate refugees and would seek mass migration. This is a recent study I was involved with, neuroscientists and psychiatrists, that the mental health effects will increase drastically, particularly the PTSD, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. These are all what will most likely happen, even if we take actions, because we're going to cross the degree and have warming. As has already been discussed, climate problem is a multi-dimensional problem. And it requires multi-dimensional solutions in addition to technical solutions. This was the conclusion about 50 of us from the University of California. We published a report. And you see that the science is in the center, but the societal transformation is on top. We placed the most importance to that, and we had engineers, technologists, social scientists, etc. The other dimensions are governance. How are we going to govern this? We need, of course, markets and regulations. We need technologies. We need ecosystem management. But we cannot just rely on technological solutions, although they are critical. We have to recognize, as already been emphasized elegantly in the previous speakers, climate problem is a social justice problem. I want to give you statistics which I presented personally to Pope Francis. More than 50% of the climate pollution is coming from the 1 billion wealthiest people in the planet, living unsustainably. Contrast that with the poorest 3 billion. They lack access to clean energy, including fossil energy, and they rely on 18th century technologies to make basic needs like cooking, home heating, and even lighting. And that woman's house, which I visited, the lighting comes from the cooking fire. So that's how 3 billion people live. And so the societal transformation, I just want to give you 2 examples of what we can do, educate them to be climate major. I'm talking about the public, and including the next generation, climate champions, climate stewards, and climate warriors. Scientists and policymakers, we have to form alliance with faith leaders to reach out to the skeptical public, particularly in the US, to unpack climate change from all the other issues that divide us. This I see is a horrendous problem, tremendous miscommunication of what's to come. So the technical solution, just to be complete, I'm presenting, there are 3 levers or levers we have to pull. First, we have to make the planet fossil-free in the next 25 years, okay? And we have renewable fuels. We have technologies to get us halfway there, but we need to develop some new ones. In addition to the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, there are other pollutants, which I call super pollutants. They contribute 40% of the warming. We've got to bring their emissions down. That step alone would avoid half of the air pollution deaths. Third, our blanket of these pollutant gases, which is trapping the heat, is already 1 trillion tons thick. We got to take some of that carbon out of the air, as much as 300 to 400 billion tons. So let me just conclude with the solution, which is what I'm focusing. Very little attention is being paid. All the attention on climate is focused on climate mitigation. But because we have delayed actions, we need to add a huge lever, climate resilience. Okay, we have to pull on that lever right away. We have to climate-proof our infrastructure, climate-proof energy access for the poor, protect public against heat waves, floods, and droughts, and have mass policies for mass migration. I think it is in this pulling this lever for resilience is where the alliance between science, religions, and policy is can play a major role. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we come now to our third speaker, Dr. Deneulin, who's joining us from Oxford, and we look forward very much to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I am not a scientist, I'm a social scientist, and I also come from the Catholic tradition. So I would like to share a few thoughts or a perspective from a social scientist and the Catholic social tradition on this dialogue between faith and science. And I want to highlight just one contribution. Professor Davison was talking about the resources that the Christian tradition has to address climate change and its spirituality. And I want to focus on one contribution, which is the spirituality of incarnation. And I want to quote here from Querida Amazonia, from the document of the Synod on the Amazon, which is the daughter of Laudato Si. It was the implementation of Laudato Si in a concrete reality. And here Pope Francis says, everything that the church has to offer must become incarnate in a distinctive way in each part of the world. Preaching must become incarnate, spirituality must become incarnate, ecclesial structures must become incarnate. And he continues in this beautiful sentence again from Querida Amazonia. So in the Christian experience, all the creatures of the material universe find a true meaning in the incarnate word. For the Son of God has incorporated in his person part of the material world, planting it a seed of definitive transformation. He is present in a glorious and mysterious way in the river, the trees, the fish, and the wind, as the Lord who reigns in creation without ever losing his transfigured wounds. While in the Eucharist, he takes up the elements of this world and confers on all things the meaning of the paschal gift. And what I would like to do is not take the Amazon as this reality of incarnation that Querida Amazonia did, but take another reality that actually I visited. It was my last trip before COVID, in the desert of Atacama in northern Chile. This one time and one place, which has been really seeing the consequence of this drive for electric cars in the so-called global north. And again, Professor Davison was mentioning that, material consumption is not the solution, technology is not the solution. And here in that one place in the Atacama Desert, we see the direct consequences of the huge demand for electric cars. That is leading to a high demand in lithium. And the lithium, probably some of you may know that more than 60% of the world's reserves are in this triangle, in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. The rest is in China and also in Australia. And also the demand for electric cars is causing a huge demand in copper, because to build an electric car, we need 4 times more copper than a normal car. And so in reference to what again, Professor Davison was saying about engineering, engineers have invented the technology to take the water directly from the ocean to the mine about 300 kilometers from the ocean, because of the water scarcity in the region. So here's an example of a technological solution to water scarcity, to continue mining, to continue exploiting the earth to a point of no return. And there could be many other places of incarnation. The bishop from Panama has already mentioned the reality of Honduras, El Salvador, Panama, Guatemala, of climate change. We can cite as well the cobalt in the DRC, or mobile phones rely very much on child labor and very dangerous labor conditions. Rare earth minerals in Mongolia that is supplying, I think it's neodymium for mobile phone. Wind energy in Mexico, the biggest energy farm in Latin America, is creating not only displacement and loss of livelihoods, but also killing the fish and producing a lot of environmental consequences. And then deep sea mining, which is now going ahead. and God knows what this will do to the unexplored marine floors. And this illustrates that this drive to the green transition in Europe, in the global north, or electric cars or mobile phones or technologies, is resource intensive. And this has consequences for real people and real ecosystems in many places in the world. So back to Atacama. So the lithium extraction is causing water scarcity through water evaporation, and just mining is a very water thirsty industry. And the scientists are needed, obviously. The scientists are needed to analyze the impact of the mining on the hydrological systems. These are very fragile hydrological systems because they depend on the water from the Andes that just flow into these salt lakes. We need the geologists, we need the botanists, because there are some very endangered trees that only grow in that desert that are dying. We need a zoologist. There's another endangered species, the flamingos. They are endangered because they cannot eat anymore the crustaceans that grow that thrive in the waters. So we also need social scientists. And as many of you mentioned, science alone cannot change heart and minds. We need everybody, and as a social scientist, we need social scientists to understand people's local cultures and how the land is tied to who they are. And I want to share with you a short testimony of a video that was made by this organization called the Observatory of the Salt Flats in the Andes, who will tell us much better than me about what it means for her that the land is becoming water scarce and the loss of life in that land. So I'll stop share the video.
Es una mentira que están hablando. ¿Por qué? Porque ellos nos quieren matar a nosotros. Porque nos están veniendo a destruir nuestra casa grande, a donde nosotros vivimos tranquilo y sanamente, con un ambiente bien limpio. Ellos vienen y destrozan todo. También dicen que es un trabajo, no es así. Es trabajo para hoy, pan para hoy, hambre para mañana. Que se lo quede bien claro. En mi relación con la mamita Pacha, con la Salina Grande, o sea, todo el territorio que tengo aquí a mi alrededor, juntamente con las vicuñas, el zorro, el suri, el lagarto, todo lo que tienen vida son parte de mi familia, es parte de mi familia. Cuando yo veo que le perforan mucho a la mamita Pacha, le sacan aquella agua como le hicieron para el lado de Candrejillo, cuando yo fui, andé todo por ahí, vi un dolor tremendo, es como que le están haciendo a mi madre o a mi propio mismo, mi cuerpo mismo. Entonces es una familia más, el territorio para mí.
So going back to PowerPoint. So I find this lady, is illustrating that hurt to the vicuña, hurt to the flamingo is hurting herself. She said, no, the Pachamama is one. We are just one family, one territory. And the mining company that comes to and promises jobs it's a lie. They're not giving us jobs. They come today, it's bread for today, and then hunger for tomorrow. When they come and they have exploited all they could here, they just go elsewhere. There's a dynamic of foreign investment. And this is one story of one place, and she's from the north of Argentina, but it could be the same in many other places in Latin America and Asia and also Africa. The story of mining companies coming to exploit the resources that fuel our consumption. And just a few words on what could the contributions of social scientists be to this debate of faith and science. Well, we need to understand the global demand for minerals and projections of demand and the pressure on local territories. So if the demand for electric cars continues as it is now, there's estimated to be no copper available in the next 40 years. So either we'll have to do deep ocean mining, which is why mining companies are starting to invest tremendously in engineering technologies to go to deep sea mine, because there's no more mineral on the soil. We just go on the sea and try our luck there. We need to understand the dynamics of investment and policy incentives. Many of these countries that are mining intensive, the governments have given very big tax rebates to these companies. I think, for example, of Peru. Peru is a country where 1/5 of the country is given to mining concessions. Imagine like 1/5 of Britain being given to mining concessions. And that's a government decision to encourage foreign investment through very favorable tax regimes. We also need to understand the role of social movements and social mobilization to defend life in territories. You may have heard of Global Witness and its recent report of environmental defenders. More than 250 people last year were killed because of defending their territories. So we need to understand, how can social movements be encouraged? How can these people be strengthened in their struggles to defend life in the territories, like this lady that we heard in northern Argentina? How can she defend her vicunias, her salt, her family in front of this massive investment from multinationals? We need to analyze power relations as well and understand the role of collective action to change these power relations. We need social movements on the ground, but we also need to understand our own power. Who is investing in Rio Tinto? Who is investing in Vedanta resources? And I think the Church of England here is leading the way in ethical investment and trying to shift these dynamics through its investment portfolio. And also we need to analyze governance processes and who makes decisions and so on. So the list is long for social scientists to contribute to this debate on faith and science in each reality. But the role of faith, we've mentioned already the role of faith, the role of spirituality, the taking care of objects. And I would like to add one contribution of the role of faith from Laudato Si is to form a heart that listens to the cry of the earth and of the poor. Now, to form a heart that listens to this lady from northern Argentina that is losing all she has because of mining extraction. To form a compassionate heart that listens to all living beings who have been silenced by global power imbalances. Not only the people who are silenced, but also the animals, the vicunias, the flamingos, the trees that are disappearing. And to be also aware of the consequences of our action on others. When we buy an electric car, what is the impact of that car on others? And I know it's not easy. There are lots of factors to take into account, but we need to be able to be formed in discernment, individually and also collectively, and how to respond to what we have listened to, how to respond to what the heart has listened to. And I want to finish with this, the wisdom of Solomon, asking God for a listening heart, how to respond to these realities of incarnation. And the Catholic Church has started with the process of the Amazon Synod, and starting with the synodal process, with the synod on synodality in 2023. But yeah, so that's my message from the Catholic social tradition on the contribution of faith from the reality of incarnation and this listening heart to the reality of the cry of the earth and of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How good to hear from the Catholic social tradition, the Roman Catholic Church's gift to the entire Christian community in the 20th century. And so we come to our final speaker, Bishop Andrus. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I want to quickly thank those of you who have made this possible for all of us to take part: Archbishop Ian, Canon Jamie, Senora Nicoletta and Professor Andrew. I'm very grateful to be part of this, and I'm sure all of us who are taking part are deeply grateful, and for the speakers who have already contributed so much. I've been asked to speak to the idea of Christian discipleship and the environment. And I didn't pick that topic, but I love it. So I'm going to begin. I hope you can all see this. I want to say that our origin stories matter. How we tell a story about how we begin, not necessarily the facts of the origin, but how we tell the story matters as to how we go on. And here we have a representation on the right-hand side of what used to be called the Big Bang when I was a child, or the Great Flaring Forth, as it's more commonly called now. And on the left, Titian's, a detail of Titian's painting of Adam and Eve in the garden, which is only one of 2 origin stories in the Hebrew scriptures. But we have our own origin story in the Anglican Communion, and it begins coterminous with the origin of the birth of modern science. So this is a representation of Isaac Newton, the great scientist who has been called the last of the great magicians and the first of the great scientists. That's how some people have said it. You see here a couple of major representations of his contributions to science, theories about light, theories about gravity. But what many people don't know is that as Anglicanism is emerging as its own strand of Christianity, one of the 3 major bodies in the world of Christians, the idea that providing the scriptures and the liturgy in the common language of the people, English, came with it a desire to make sure that those translations from original languages, Greek and Hebrew, were accurate. And it was the beginning of a kind of science, of textual analysis. And Isaac Newton himself vigorously participated in textual analysis of the scriptures, particularly the New Testament, to be able to help determine the authenticity of passages. In his posthumous letters was a detailed analysis of a portion of one of the Johannine letters, trying to determine whether it was accurate or not. So we had divines, mainly ordained people, working on texts alongside, if you will, chemists, physicists, biologists, all beginning the work of science. And so the Anglican way of being Christian had an origin with modern science and a certain interplay which was unique in the history of the Christian, major Christian denominations. And at the same time, later, but deeply influential on who we are, the Industrial Revolution begins in the United Kingdom. And on the left, you see a representation of Watt's steam engine. And on the right is what is known as a pit pony. They are smaller draft animals that were deliberately used in the coal mines. That's a coal mine. So here we have 2 things. The origin of what Watt called horsepower. And he was using pit ponies to measure how much coal they could pull out of these pits where they labored in the dark and under these difficult conditions. And that was how he started to measure the power of the steam engine. So you've got like a whole picture there of what has now become our world. The world shaped by extractive industries, the world shaped by consumerism, and quite importantly, a world shaped by people who see themselves as subjects, having subjectivity, and a world filled with objects, animals, the earth, and other people. So this is the context into which we are being called to be disciples, a world shaped by a kind of interplay between science and faith, and a world that has been shaped by the principles and the values of the Industrial Revolution. What does it mean to be a disciple? Now, this is from the Gospel of Marc. You may recognize that we were just living with this gospel pieces of it in the lectionary last week. Turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." This comes in the Gospel of Marc after Jesus has been explaining privately to his disciples, privately but openly to them, that the Messiah would be betrayed, would suffer, would be executed, and would be raised from the dead. And Peter takes Jesus aside to remonstrate with him, to say, no, don't let this happen. Turn away from this path. Save yourself, save us. And this is Jesus's response. Now, this is very famous. This saying, "Get behind me, Satan." We don't often pay attention to the fact that this statement is related to the statement that comes afterwards. Jesus called the crowd and his disciples, and he said to them, "If any want to be my followers," this is what it is to be a disciple, to be followers of Jesus, "let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." That word "follow," and many of you know, if you look at the Greek of what Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," and this saying to be followers and to follow me, these are the same words. So what Jesus is really saying to Peter is he's not get behind me like get out of here. What he's saying is get in the right position, that is behind me, in order to follow, rather than in front of me. So in terms of the word that we normally get as repentance, metanoia, this is to get the mind that we need in order to meet the current conditions of our world. This is what metanoia really means. So to be disciples is to follow Jesus, and with Jesus, to always be attentive to the conditions of the world in which we find ourselves, not the conditions of the world of the past, nor of the far future, but the conditions of the world as we are encountering them today, and to be responsive to those. This is what it means to be a disciple. So, as people who are conversant with science and have grown up in this interplay with science, and I'll also point out, just touching on it, that of course it is also within the Church of England that the origin of species is published. So the whole idea of evolution comes to be in this mix where there is a deep interplay between science and faith. So in that mix, and owning responsibility for our place in what has created a mindset that is highly toxic and destructive in our world, the mindset, the perspective that has come from the Industrial Revolution, mindful of all that, we in the Episcopal Church have decided that we want to transform our lives, to have our lives transformed. And the presiding bishop, the Most Reverend Michael Bruce Curry, and our General Convention, which is our major legislative body, have affirmed a pathway to household, congregational, regional, diocesan, and church-wide transformation from an unsustainable life to a sustainable life. And the pathway that we are have chosen to use is a carbon tracker, a web-based carbon tracker that we have, under Sheila Andrus's leadership, have customized for people of faith, particularly for Episcopalians. So we call it SustainIslandHome.org. So if you go to SustainIslandHome, one word, .org, you will find a landing page like this, which Sheila and Lisa Altieri and Stephanie Martin Taylor have created so that people of faith feel welcomed into a pathway of transformation from a disintegrated, alienated life to a sustainable life. And what this tool will help faithful people do, you in your household, your congregation, your diocese, your church, what it will help you do is first measure your carbon footprint and find out how much you're actually putting into the atmosphere. These are science-based ideas. And it's Lisa Altieri who has created the basic platform that we built Sustain Island Home on. That's brightaction.com, brightaction.com. That can be by secular groups, cities, so secular organizations like the Girl Scouts, anybody. That they have done so much work to make it easy. You don't have to go and look at all your energy bills. Much of that is already loaded on, including for Europe. After you measure your carbon output, then you are guided through a series of choices. 92 choices are there. That sounds like a lot, but you should see it as opportunity. And you make a plan for transformation from an unsustainable life to a sustainable life. And that plan could take several years. It also saves people money, and it helps them lead a more satisfying life, because we believe it is more satisfying to be in alignment with the way God intended the world to be than otherwise. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions can be traced to household choices, to choices that we make in our daily lives. This has been well measured in the United States. This applies. And some people have said this kind of carbon tracker doesn't really apply to developing countries, and that is very true. This is taking responsibility. This is taking responsibility for the, may I say, overdeveloped countries within them, for the United States, for the European nations. We have benefited from these wildly impossible disequities in terms of access to resources, and that we have used and taken to ourselves. So we're taking responsibility. This is for us. And it is also for the purpose of advocacy. There have been quite a few articles lately that have made the point, which is a true point, that carbon trackers were created by the fossil fuel industry, and that this is a ploy, also a true point, from the fossil fuel industry to distract us from their own activities. Well, we are not going to allow that to be. We are using science-based goals to measure our carbon footprint, drive our carbon footprint down, and then to aggregate that reduction together. So we'll know how much we are taking out of the environment, out of the atmosphere, and we can advocate on that basis. When we speak to legislators in the United States, it is much more impactful to be able to say that we are not just advocating this in the abstract, but that we have indeed taken the steps to change our own lives, and that we have measured what that collective impact will be. And on the basis of that, we are asking and indeed demanding that our government and the fossil fuel companies and those who are connected to the fossil fuel companies change their lives too. So in the United States, we are talking about this as a whole society approach to climate change, meaning every sector must do its part. And we are seeing, along with divestment and other means, this path of integration from a disintegrated, alienated life to an integrated life, to be part of the faith community, part of the Episcopal Church's contribution to a whole society approach to climate change. Even so, as Professor Ramanathan pointed out, there are already baked in dangers, and already vulnerable peoples, vulnerable species, vulnerable ecosystems are feeling the leading edges of climate change. This is unavoidable at this point, and it is probably unavoidable that we will sail past 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels. That is my assessment of it, and I believe we will probably sail past 2. This is quite a disaster for the planet, for all of life on the planet. In the face of that, I return to this narrative from the Gospel of Marc. In the same passage, when Jesus talks to them about the dangers of wealth and of the alienated life that goes with some of the vast wealth, Jesus says to them, and I'm translating kingdom of God into a better translation of beloved community. I invite you to try that, put it into places wherever you see kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven, translate it into beloved community. So Jesus says to them again, children, how hard it is to enter the beloved community. The disciples were greatly astounded and said to one another, then who can be saved? Jesus looked at them and said, for mortals it is impossible, but not for God. For God, all things are possible. And in the same series of paintings, I've included Tissot, the painter who did the others, his illustration of the resurrection. For this is the impossible thing that God has done that tells us that all things are possible. To resurrect Jesus from the dead is to tell us that God wills love, which is the only eternal thing in the universe. Faith, hope, and love endure, but the greatest of these is love, and from love we derive hope. The resurrection is the sign of divine love, and it gives us hope. We, as faithful people, can face this terrible moment, which will become more terrible, especially for the vulnerable of the earth, and have hope that with God, all things are possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to remind people that we're going to receive questions by chat. We've run over a little bit in terms of our timing, and so I think what might go by the wayside will be the discussion between the panels. We've had our share of the time, so we're going to have our 5-minute screen break, and during that time I invite people to send me questions that we want to discuss. I want to thank the people that we've just heard, but I will do that at the beginning of our next session. So I make it 7:15 here in the UK, perhaps 8:15 in Rome, and we'll just have a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 7:20. Thank you very much. Excellent. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Archbishop Murray for his connection to the pandemic. I had a psychologist say to me just a couple of days ago, it's going to take us 2 years to work out what the pandemic means for us. And it will mean different things according to how we actively respond to it. And let us hope that that will be a way that is friendly to the earth. I was very grateful for that discussion and in the next talk about the pivot to health. I've heard it said that we wouldn't entertain the idea of asbestos in our houses, even though it does a good job at fireproofing, because it kills people. And we've had a campaign against tobacco, and it's been very effective. If we can see climate change and carbon pollution and other forms of pollution as equivalent to that, we'd be going down the right line. Then Dr. Deneulin's talk, I thought, was perhaps the most sobering of all of them, and this sense that the responses that we might want to make, they have a dark side to them, they have a shadow side to them, and I really want to explore there what the responsible ways forward are. And then our final talk, I'm very grateful there to see the witness of a community, a part of the United States, particularly affluent part of the United States, which alongside countries like England have so much responsibility for carbon pollution. It's good to see you on the front foot of making a response. As a scholastic as a student of scholastic theology, if there was one thing I would take issue with, is the idea that science only comes to birth in early modernity. So St. Albert the Great wrote a book on minerals, a book on vegetables, and a book on animals. That's the book on animals. So I love this book. It's fantastic to read, but it's also a great prop that there was some science in the Middle Ages. I hope you won't mind me saying that in good humor.
No, good humor. I did say modern science.
Yeah. So we've got some great questions coming up here. And one of them is to ask, what are the concrete things that we can do? What would 5 concrete forms of changed life that would really make a difference? What might they be? And I wonder if some of those who have more of an expertise in the practical responses could come up with some suggestions.
Well, let me say, I saw that question. I think a Meatless Friday is a really excellent idea. The contribution to suffering and to climate change from our industrial farming practices is vast, and it's a simple way to begin. But I would say that the carbon tracker that I've suggested is perhaps one of the very best ways, because food is one of the areas of choices that you can make under there. So if you will, it's kind of a compendium choice. So you can make choices under food, under water, under local travel, under international travel, and on your energy in your home.
Yeah, I really like that answer, because I think we need to be real about the relative importance of different responses that we can make. So, you know, bamboo toothbrushes are great, but if getting a bamboo toothbrush makes me feel that I'm absolved from flying around the world, it's actually done more harm than good. So getting the numbers down like that are really important. But that whole revolution of eating, I think, is really important. And this idea of like a plant first. So at my college in Cambridge, things have really changed. It's not that we have lots of meat options and there's a vegetarian thing sometimes thrown in. Vegetarian, even vegan, is where we lead with, and there's sometimes meat. And these sorts of changes, especially, of course, ruminants. So chicken and so on is not, pork's not so much of a problem. It's lamb and beef that are particularly the problem. So I wonder if any of our other guests would have some suggestions about things that we can do.
If I may say, I see that Bishop John was there about what we do with the buildings, with the houses, with the land, with the money, and I think that could be applied at the individual as much as the institution level. And I think the churches with the Catholic Church is trying for us to map out what are the assets at the level of the diocese. What do we do with the buildings, and then where do we invest the money? Where do we spend the money? And I think these are concrete decisions that we can make in terms of investment, building, and land.
I think that's incredibly important, because and also to think about our role as lobbyists, our role as trustees of charities and that sort of thing. Few of us are going to have enormous investments of our own, but the institutions that we belong to and pension funds and things like that, we can make our voice heard. And I think there's really been a shift. So the Church of England was slow, I think, on this, but now is leading the way in quite an impressive way. And Cambridge, we're supposed to be a very democratic university. The teachers are actually in charge. We had to really press to get divestment, and then it happened. And then the colleges have changed. My own college I thought it was going to be a big, complicated process. We just voted. We would divest from fossil fuels just like that. And this will really, if I might say it, put the fear of God into these fossil companies, because if we realise that it's got to stay in the ground, then these companies are going to become worthless unless they change their act. So I think that's incredibly important. Good. I'm going to move on. We've got a good question here. What resources do we have theologically to draw attention to foster more relational accounts of nature? And I'm interested in suggestions to that. I myself have done some work on relationships between species and trying to get us beyond a paradigm just of competition, that actually nature is also built on cooperation. And I will put a couple of links into the chat of things that I've written on that front. But I'd be really glad of suggestions on this more integrative, holistic view of doctrines of creation. Any suggestions? Well, again, plugging myself, I can claim to have written a book, which is here, Participation in God, Studying Christian Doctrine and Metaphysics, which is an exploration of what does it mean for everything about everything to come from God? And if everything comes forth from God, how does it come forth from God intrinsically related? So relation isn't something that we just put on as an overlay afterwards. It's actually integral to everything that comes forth created. So and I could talk a bit more about that, but any other suggestions about things that you've read here we are, God's Good Earth, Praise and Prayer for Creation by Anne and Jeffrey Rowthorne. Of course, Laudato Si and the Pope's subsequent encyclicals are important there. So another question here. Let me look through some questions that we've got here. I guess this is a question about the lithium question. Are electric cars, electric bicycles, and so on, are they still part of the solution? But if we're not going to do that, presumably fossil fuel-driven cars are not particularly good either. So, what do we need to be lobbying for? More public transport? Is that the answer? Bicycles? I don't know. Dr. Deneulin, what would you say on that front?
Well, that's definitely the view from the people who live in the extractive territories, is that the solution is not more electric cars, not more electric bikes, but massive investment in public transport. Because by shifting to fossil fuel to electric cars, we continue to give a solution, the same solution than before, which is through, we tackle climate change through consumption, just another way of consumption. Unless you reduce the consumption, that's the only way forward, because consumption requires extraction. And or unless there is a room for technology like recycling the batteries. For the moment, it's far too expensive to recycle the batteries from electric cars, and so it's much cheaper to mine. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't buy electric cars, but it's not the solution. As someone said, we should not put our faith in science to solve the problem. And there's definitely the views coming from the social movements at the grassroots level. Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this question of whether the solutions that are being proposed to us are actually as good as they are said to be?
Andrew.
Yes.
I really do appreciate the answers and the contributions that were done before. I want to say a special thanks to Severine and Dr. Severine, and also to Bishop Marc, especially for coming up with ideas and actual things that can be done. But I think there is also some work that needs to happen in conjunction with the different governments in the different countries. There is a whole section within the agreement, Paris Agreement, that speaks about loss and damage, which is a response to the countries that are now developing, the responsibility, the financial and economic responsibility of the developed countries to the smaller countries in terms of adaptation and in terms of resolving situations that cannot be adapted to. That is also a call to respond to the dignity of human beings in smaller countries. I say thank you, Marc, because you took a big chance and responded to the countries, the bigger countries that need to do something that will help the smaller countries. And speaking on their behalf, I think it's important also to realize that it's a matter of resilience, but resilience with justice. If the justice issue is not present, there is nothing worthwhile doing. And I take the opportunity to raise our voices to my brothers and sisters in the larger countries, so that you as religious leaders would take on a responsibility to have conversation with your governments and make sure that they're signing on whatever they are signed on to, that they will comply with it. So it's important where you can do the divesting and where you can do the carbon trace. But in the countries where you can't do that, there needs to be another response. And the response has to do with how we prepare for these challenging times, how we do recycling, how we create awareness, how ecumenical leaders and also interfaith leaders come together and bring about a testimony of our care for Earth. Okay, so I think it's important to make sure that the spectrum is complete. There are things that the bigger countries can do, and there are things that the smaller countries can do. And I hope that we also bear that in mind. Thank you very much.
Archbishop Julio, this is Marc. My friend, you are absolutely so right. And one of the areas for advocacy that we all need to work on, but especially the larger countries, more prosperous countries, is to push those countries to make the contribution to the Green Climate Fund. Let me say that again, to push those countries to make their contributions to the Green Climate Fund, because we are very far behind. And it is from that money that some of the loss and damage work has to be funded. So the Australia, the United States, the UK have all underfunded the area of loss and damage, especially for places that we know are actually going to disappear. Places like Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, they are already almost on an irretrievable path towards complete loss and damage. And it is our responsibility to fund that. So the advocacy work is essential.
Excellent. So there's much more we could talk about there, but I'm going to hand back to Canon Hawkey to draw things to a close.
Thank you, Andrew, very much indeed. And huge thanks to our distinguished panel of speakers for sharing such a diverse range of reflections this evening and for engaging in a diverse range of conversations. The recording of this webinar will be on the Centre website in the next week or so. And you can see on the website under the study section, there is one other international webinar advertised for the remainder of this year, which is a discussion between young ecumenists about where they see the ecumenical venture going. Again, the registration details for that will be on the website about a month before. Now, last Sunday, the Anglican Centre in Rome celebrated its founding benefactors, Donna Orietta and Frank Pogson Doria Pamphili, as the Archbishop of Canterbury unveiled a plaque in their memory in the centre. And we're as reliant today on friends and donors as we were then. So if you've enjoyed this evening, please do consider making a donation to the Centre's work via the website, and to look at our urgent appeal pages, again, on the website, which outline our current need. That appeal has now raised significantly over half its total, but we're still looking to get over the line. So please give as generously as you can to support the Centre's mission. Again, sincere thanks to our panelists, especially to Andrew Davison for his magisterial introduction and chairing of this session. It's been great to be together in this electronic form of koinonia. We had Archbishop Michael Burrows, the Bishop of Cashel, Ferns and Ossory, who's the chairman of governors of the centre, to pray with us at the very end. But Michael's had to go to a diocesan meeting. Something never stopped. So I'm going to ask Archbishop Jan to close us with a prayer and with his blessing. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I just want to say that one thing which has struck me, that actions are not enough. We need a different approach. And this evening, we've been able to find the right approach, and we've got to be together so that we can, with Jesus Christ, bring salvation again to this broken world of ours. Thank you very much. May we pray together. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful time that we've had, engaging with each other, faith and science, and look at the potential solutions that will enable us to be better stewards of God's creation. We thank you for those who have contributed this evening to make this session a productive one, a reflective one, that will allow us to be able to bring the needed change, the change of mentality, of mindset, so that we become more proactive with each other, creating an atmosphere of mutual understanding and working together for the sake of God's kingdom. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. I wish here to thank all those who have made this online session possible, and the warmest thanks to Mr. Esposito Neto from the Centro Pro Unione, who has been our technical officer this evening. Thank you to you, Mr. Neto, and thank you to all of you for making this event a wonderful one that will remain in our memory for a long time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.